Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Eric Huey. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Entertainment Software Association. We are the trade association for the $23 billion United States video game market. Can everybody hear okay in the back of the room? Hello, everybody watching on Twitch. We're very thrilled to be streaming worldwide on our GovGames Twitch stream. And thrilled that you're here today for this terrific discussion on virtual reality, AR, and MR. We're going to hear a little bit from this incredible panel of experts. We're thrilled to work with the chairs of the Reality Caucus and launch this important caucus. When you think about virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality and where it is now, it's a $5 billion industry already in 2016. It's going to be $162 billion in 2020. This industry is exploding, and people think of it in terms of video games, but it's so much more resonant and deep and broad than simply that. So we're really excited. We've got a terrific panel of experts. Thrilled all of them traveled to be here. Thrilled and we'll introduce them. They'll introduce themselves more fully. Thrilled to have the former ESA board member and dear friend Mike Capps in from North Carolina, Andy Phelps, who runs Rochester Institute of Technology video game design program and is on the board of the Higher Education Video Game Alliance, Will Mason from Upload VR, who just came in from the West Coast and was with the Unity folks, and I want to introduce Brenda Freeman from who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Magic Leap. But prior to heading to Magic Leap, and they're doing some incredible things. I'm under a non-disclosure, so I can't describe them very fully, but I'll leave that to her. But it's really cutting edge stuff. What I can say is when you see this, you get a sense of what the future looks like. You feel like you're in a science fiction film, and the future, the singularity is fast approaching, as they say. Prior to joining Magic Leap in the past year, she was the chief marketing officer for Nat Geo here in Washington, D.C. A lot of people in D.C. say that they know where the bodies are buried, but she has been in the catacombs of the Nat Geo building and actually knows where a lot of the bodies are buried. Prior to that, she was at Turner Animation. She was at MTV. She was at Nickelodeon. She was at DreamWorks. She ran their head of marketing for their television division. She's on the national board of Savannah College Art and Design, Herman Miller, the Fernbank Museum in Atlanta, which I love, as well as Girl Scouts of America. So I will turn it over to our moderator, and thank you all for being here again and taking the time, and look forward to a terrific discussion over the next 60 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? Is my mic on? Okay, testing. Hello. So I'm Brenda Freeman. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Just a little bit before we get into the discussion with our esteemed panelists. So about Magic Leap, we are a Florida-based company, and we're developing mixed reality computing platform that uses digital light field technology that integrates virtual content into real environments. And we enable people to interact with the world in very different ways than ever possible before. So first off, we want to make sure that we thank Representatives Flores, Liu, Del Bene, Clark, and ESA for their leadership in forming and launching this Reality Caucus. We look forward to working with the members to inform them about how AR, VR, and MR will enhance our lives and revolutionize opportunities for education, training, commerce, design, and entertainment. So we also want to thank ESA for its leadership and hard work in making today possible. We also thank you all for being here. We look forward to serving as a resource for the policymakers, and we thank you for the opportunity to participate today. So you guys heard a little bit about the esteemed panel. They all are esteemed in their own right, and I think that we'll have a really great conversation for the next 45 minutes or so. And I think perhaps what might be the best thing is for these guys to sort of introduce themselves, and we'll just go down the list, and then we'll start our conversation.
Awesome.
Will?
Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Will Mason. I'm the co-founder and president at Upload. Upload is dedicated to sort of helping foster the ecosystem around the professional community for VR and AR. We've got sort of multi-dimensional business. We do the leading publication, uploadvr.com. We have developer training, taking sort of people from experts, from beginners to experts in VR and AR development. We also do co-working spaces that are focused on VR and AR, and we'll be doing some investing as well. My journey in VR has been about 2.5 years at this point, and I really am just inspired by the potentials that this technology has to change the world in a very meaningful way. And so I'm excited to be here with these fine people and to talk a little bit more about that with you guys.
Andy?
Yep. I'm Andy Phelps. I'm from the Rochester Institute of Technology. I founded the Game Design and Development program and the School of Interactive Games and Media there. It's currently in the top 5 or so programs in the United States. Has been ever since it was, I guess, born. So that's going on 6, 7, 8 years now. So you can find our graduates at pretty much every major technology company in this space at this point. So that's been pretty neat. And now I run a digital media research and production center for the entire campus, servicing the entire campus community of about 20,000. So we've been at this a little while, and hopefully we can share some of what we've learned about that with y'all today.
I have no idea why I'm here. I'm not esteemed at all. I started in VR about 25 years ago, 10 times longer than Will, but Will actually makes money doing it. I started in computer graphics and then went into military simulation, and I was the guy who was super mad that the $2 million SimNet box for tank training was nowhere near as good as the $40 thing you can buy on the shelf, and spent a lot of time on entertainment defense collaboration, ending at the Naval Postgraduate School, and working there on large-scale virtual reality, and then VR blew up. You might remember that part. There were cool movies 20 years ago, and then it went away forever. Well, it was still kind of working very quietly. I switched to video games because there was money there, and spent a dozen years or so running an international video game company, built some of the foundational technology for VR, and iPhone games and Xbox games, basically any platform in which you could blow up someone's head. We made those and corrupted the youth of the world for a while. I'm kidding, of course. So we made fun video games for a long time, and did some really cool, serious things with those as well. And I retired a few years ago from the video game space, but still stay active in VR and video games. My personal soapbox is about thinking about VR's implication and social VR's implications, and how fundamentally our society and the way we communicate and the way we travel and the way we work is going to change in the next 5 to 7 years. And my great fear that DC and Brussels and London won't understand that change until it's already happened, and then we're playing catch-up regulatory games as opposed to getting ahead of it. So I'm delighted to serve as a resource for anyone who's interested in how that's going to change, and we'll probably talk some more about that soon.
That's great. So thanks, Mike. So let's start with just sort of level setting a little bit with respect to the definitions. So I'm going to start with Mike.
Okay.
Before you take a sip.
I'm good.
Why don't you explain the differences between virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality? What's the difference? Is it all the same?
So I was a professor, so I can spend an hour doing this. Let's start with who here has used a virtual reality device. Put a mask on your face, whatever else. That is pretty darn good, and it's better than the average in the country. Way better than the average of the 435 people some of us work for. So virtual reality is a fully immersive system. For those of you who haven't used it yet, you cover your ears, you cover your eyes, and all you're experiencing is some world that someone made up. That could be World of Warcraft. It could be Machu Picchu. And there's great examples of entertainment and serious applications. So I would say that augmented reality is glasses. Don't you have a pair running around somewhere? I guess it's, so that is the heads-up display that you've seen in cars for a dozen years, or it's, there we go. Or Pokemon Go is a great example of augmented reality. It's a terrible example of augmented reality, but it's within the space of augmented reality, which is you can hold it up and see something that isn't there superimposed on top of reality. Personally, I think that's game-changing. 6 years from now, I doubt anyone's going to be looking down at their phone to navigate or message or communicate in the United States. That's my guess. Maybe 7 years. But imagine that quick of a switch, right? That everybody, just like iPhone's only 10 years old, 7 years from now, everybody's wearing augmented reality glasses and saying, why would you have your competition in your pocket most of the time as opposed to up here all the time? And then mixed reality is some combination of those two, where you're actually creating worlds and also experiencing the world at the same time. And Magic Leap knows way more about that than I do. I think they think of themselves in that space. So do you want to talk about MR a little bit?
Nope, go ahead,
Nope.
Mike.
It's
Go ahead.
so it's a
You're
spectrum.
doing great.
It's absolutely a spectrum, and the far futurists think that spectrum will just become invisible at some point. You won't think about how much of what you're seeing is real versus how much you're seeing isn't real because it won't matter, and that's going to be a pretty cool change. The question is, how soon does that occur? So is that enough? VR is fully immersive. AR is mostly the real world with some augmentation to it, and MR is kind of mid on that spectrum.
I think that's good. And so what we're going to do, we're definitely going to talk a lot about the future, but before we go there, like I'm going to direct the question to Will. So just tell us what's happening today. Like how is the technology actually being used today that might be a surprise to to the audience here?
I think it might be a surprise that it's succeeded beyond gaming in a major way. I mean, there's big industries like real estate, for example, where it's completely been transformative. Imagine being able to show a client, a $25 million building and walk through and be able to say, oh no, that beam actually needs to be like 2 inches taller. It's not something that you can do with blueprints as easily. So that's been one area that has been really transformative. We've gotten to a state now where we have consumer devices on the market, and while we don't necessarily have a mass market state right now, it is we're approaching that direction within the next few years. Right? There's hundreds of thousands of PC-based headsets on the market, millions of mobile phone-based headsets on the market, and it's really the content now is starting to catch up with the technology.
Got it. And so I'm going to turn to our Professor Andy on the panel. So talk to us a little bit about the courses that are currently available to students, with respect to VR, MR, AR. Like what's out there currently right now?
Sure. I think, right now, everybody's sort of guess, right, would be, oh, well, it's going to be an engineering course. It's going to be a course in computer science where you kind of mess around with, graphics and maybe some AI thrown in and do a little world building and create a little thing. And certainly those courses exist. But one of the exciting things is that the way that this technology cuts across all the different fields at a university. So at a place like RIT, we're seeing folks at the really, really low level, right, that are exploring, human cognition, perception, color theory, the biology of the eye, things like that, all the way through application spaces that go into architecture, humanities, healthcare, et cetera, right? And so a place like mine that when it started, I think was somewhat insular in the fact that, folks kind of shoved us to the corner and said, oh, you do video games, right? Mm-hmm. Now they're coming, now the Med Center is coming to us saying, we have some implications on how this could be really useful for patients. Mm-hmm. We have some implications on how this could be really useful for kids with autism. We just did a building launch on campus where instead of taking another silly photo with people with little shovels in the ground, we asked everybody in the audience to download an app and see the building that wasn't there yet, right? So it really changes your conversation with people when you can employ these technologies. So it's kind of proliferating across campus and by extension across education in a whole variety of ways.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think that really it's creating a need in tons of industries for the sort of real-time renderer or engine learning. And I think that what you're seeing happen as well at that level is more of a democratization of the content creation. Like Unity right now, Unreal, both are trying to make content creation as easy as possible and as accessible as possible for creatives and artists, so that you don't necessarily have to have a huge programming background to do it. Visual programming with Blueprint, or what Unity is doing with Carte Blanche, which is essentially, an idea of using card-based systems and setting up, sort of just dropping in assets into a world, creating a system that's as easy to use as possible. So I think what we're going to see with this sort of transition is that the creatives will become the creators.
I think that's a perfect point, right? Because we're seeing it in art schools and in humanities schools and places like that, where before it was sort of walled off in engineering as this very techie, geeky thing that folks were doing, and now as people are starting to, I work with this organization. We've got high school students doing this, junior high students creating content in this.
I'm so mad at
it's gonna
them.
be-
Right, because I mean, it took me 30 years to get my first 3D authoring tool, and now the average 8-year-old in the United States has built a Minecraft world, right? And that's the people we're talking about coming up into college. They've already learned how to build 3D worlds and immersive spaces, and they're going to be imagining things that we can't.
Yeah, we run these introduction to Unity courses that are like a 3-day long course, and by the end of it, you're taking somebody that has 0 experience, and they're creating 2 apps before the end of the course. It's the ramp up speed is very easy, at least for the first sort of trough, and obviously there's a significant amount of mastering that one can do to do some really cool stuff. But
Is that free?
Unity?
Is that no your class?
No.
How much does it cost?
Varies depending on the location.
Got it. Okay. Because we should get it to anyone here who is interested, right? And I'll pay for it if you won't. But I think just that much immersion in it will shock you how quickly this is going to grow.
So, well, I've got another question for Andy, just in terms of, so what are kids graduating with? What types of degrees, like very specifically, if they're being introduced in all these different, courses, the different disciplines, like what sort of degrees are you guys graduating with from RIT?
Well, RIT is a large technical institute, so the bulk of folks that we graduate, predominantly undergraduates, so the bulk of folks that we graduate would be graduating with the Bachelor's of Science in something, be it game design and development, computer science, information technology, something like that. But we're also graduating BFAs, right? We're graduating BAs, we're graduating master's students that want to apply these technologies towards their thesis in various areas. We're graduating doctoral students in things like imaging science and perception and those kinds of things. So it's a real gamut, right?
Thank you for that answer. I want to take a minute to recognize one of the founding co-chairs of the VR, AR, MR Caucus. It's a mouthful, Enhanced Reality Caucus, Daryl Issa. We were talking last night about some of the technology that you've seen. As the Congressman knows technology, he owns more patents than probably everybody in Congress combined.
Yeah, but it's a low bar.
But we were talking about this technology. We were talking about the Magic Leap example that appeared in Wired magazine about Tinkerbell, and you said, well, in the 60s and 70s, people saw Tinkerbell floating around, but there was a different.
That was a different virtual reality.
But you talked a lot about some of the visionary things that could happen in terms of job skill training, in terms of people with ocular disorders, seeing in the future. And no, I want to. This is your setup. I want to introduce the Congressman. Thank you for your leadership, and greatly appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, and I'll be very brief. I was actually over at a CTA event where we were talking about the workforce of the future, and quite candidly, the numbers are startling. If you take the number of people, as we talked last night, that work in our internet, if you will, society, the people that support the backbone and so on, it's 6% of the workforce, or 6% of the GDP for 3 million people. Well, the arithmetic on that is pretty interesting, because what it means is 50 million jobs for 320 million people if you had that same level of efficiency. Now that would mean that you'd have about 100 million people out looking for a job. Scary, right? Except this is exactly where we were many generations ago, when half the population worked on the farm, and 95% of those people are now off the farm, and yet we have full employment. So when we look at what's going to replace it, a lot of it's going to be exactly here. Creating new and innovative products that do and enable things that were never available before. And some of it's going to be, doing surgical training by doing a real life operation on a real human being that really lived or died based on your operation. But now you're going to get to relive it 100 times till you get it right, because you're going to be able to operate on that patient in virtual reality. You're going to capture the actual surgery and do it until you get the brain not to be broken. You're going to do it until you take care of the heart. Yes, you're also going to be able to design a house, a room, and your furniture that you've never been to, never lived in, and quite frankly, maybe decide you don't want to by the end of it all, but you're going to be able to do all of that quickly and with tools that aren't created today. Now I'm going to hit you with another one. It's going to be better than gaming. Because unlike gaming as we see it today, which is a big part of where we see, the virtual reality going, gaming is about somebody else's interpretation of what you're going to experience. Virtual reality in the foreseeable future is going to be about what you experience that nobody else anticipated. The tools are going to be far beyond the tools of the gaming world. So why do we need this caucus? Because we're going to start asking the question of, can somebody get their pilot's license with 75, 80, 90% of the time being a virtual reality? Can we in fact create better doctors with a lot less time over a human being and a lot more time in, if you will, the simulator as we would call it today? Government's going to have to be creative in understanding that. And oh, by the way, there are some risks. And risks have to be borne by the creator, but they have to be not unreasonable. And that means government needs to make sure that we define what you can or can't do very, very broadly so that you can innovate. So, am I excited? I'm excited because I see the efficiency giving us 50 million people or more who are going to be available for new and innovative things we don't even have today. So, thank you for being here at the launch, because the fact is, every caucus says this is really important, especially like the Motorsports Caucus, the Fishing Caucus, the Friends of Pennsylvania Caucus. But this one is really the future. And everyone's lives are going to be touched by it and improved by the products that are going to come out of these innovations. And I gave you some hypotheticals. People are going to give you some currents, but you're going to be the determinant of what the new reality is, of what you can do that you can't do today. And just so you know, it doesn't replace the vacation, but it lets you plan your vacation in a way you never could have before. It lets you decide where you want to go and what you want to see in a way you would never before. So I'm still going to want to sit there on a boat under Niagara Falls and get wet, but I'm going to want to make the determination of Canadian side or US side without having to try both of them. So thank you. I'm excited. You might notice that, and I look forward to the rest of your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again for your vision and your leadership on this. Greatly appreciated. Brenda, we'll turn it back over to you.
That's great. Thank you. So maybe that's an actual good sort of entree to start talking a little bit about, the future and industry in general. Let's talk a little bit about some of the disruptions that are currently happening in the technology industry. Who wants to maybe sort of take this? I think it'll be good to just sort of have some observations and some specific examples. Anyone from the panel?
It'll totally replace your vacation. Yeah. He's absolutely wrong. So there's one, right? Virtual tourism and educational tourism, right? That's disrupting rapidly, and I think it will be more so. It's less, I think, about planning and more about places you can't go, either due to security or the fact they no longer exist, right? So it's quite possible to go see Babylon at its height, not as it exists today, or doesn't, I suppose. So there's an easy one, and you see that for education very quickly. Google Expeditions, bringing 20 headsets into a classroom. They're all slaved to a teacher's unit. It's pretty cheap to do. It's $2,000 to put everything in and then walk away with that equipment and put it in another classroom and take children to a place they could never go otherwise. It's fascinating how quickly that's going to change education and tourism.
Yeah, I to echo on that fact, there's places that have actually been captured that have since been destroyed now, like actual monuments that have been captured using photogrammetry, which is a technique that allows you to create photorealistic models from a series of images. And I think that what we're seeing is a convergence of a lot of these technologies too. It's the MR, AR revolution side of things is all about the contextualization of information in a spatial environment. And what I mean by that is, I think the example I like to pull on is imagine a world where you have a pair of glasses in the future, and you walk outside, and you ever have that kind of moment where you see a group of people gathered, and maybe they're waiting in line for something, and you're like, what on earth are they waiting in line for? Well, using something similar to like Twitter's API in the future, you'll be able to tap in and say, okay, well, here's the location I am. This is the image that I'm recognizing. Here's some tweets of other individuals around this area. Let me kind of take all that information, distill it down, and say, oh, well, they're waiting in line for the latest Nike shoe launch, and maybe here's a link to buy that Nike shoe, right? I think that that's sort of where this is going. It's sort of, if you look at your phone as an extension of your brain, it's a dumb extension of your brain because you have to input to it. What MR is really going to bring and AR is really going to bring is sort of that instant contextualization of that extension of your mental capacity.
You want to explain contextualization a little bit, Professor?
Well, what I was running through my head when you were saying that was when you think about interacting with your phone, right? We took all of the complexities of human interaction and we boiled them down to our thumbs. Right, so like this is our interface, right, which is a pretty poor interface. And one of the things I think that's exciting about augmented reality in particular in the short term, and probably mixed reality in the slightly longer term, is this notion of being able to understand the frame that you're operating in immediately, right? And so, one of the examples that I was thinking of last night was, if you're like me and you were not very good at biology, there was some experience in your education where you cut open a thing. You were forced to cut open, either was an earthworm or a frog or whatever, right? And you cut it open and you were like, I don't know, there's stuff, right? And if you were looking at that through those glasses that you just showed, it could pull apart what you were looking at and offer an explanation for what you were seeing, right? And so we talk about contextualization, we talk about understanding understanding the moment as you're in it.
Yeah.
There's huge potential there for, just an educational capacity in almost any field, right? To begin to engage with information in the cloud in a way that's immediate.
Yeah.
Right.
Another just sort of illustrative use case too. I think it would be fairly applicable to this room. So you've got a big meeting with like 12 people in it. You've got everybody's name on your calendar invite, and then you walk into the room, and all of a sudden your AR glasses recognize and scan every single person in the room, and you can see kind of here's their LinkedIn profile and a little bit of information about them. That gives you instant contextual information about the people that you're speaking with, and that can be very, very helpful.
No privacy concerns, though.
Yeah. Oh, of course. No privacy.
This is DC. We do that all already. That's our
Nice.
skill set.
It's Devil Wears Prada event. I think far more important is when you go into that meeting, you can get an IMAX level 45-degree field of view experience of a movie, and nobody has any idea that you were watching a movie during that meeting. There's no this anymore. You don't have to. The replacement for noticing people are looking at their phone will be, are you making direct eye contact with folks? Because it's too easy to have ESPN, a movie, your Twitter feed up on one side and nobody'd ever know. Not saying that's what people use it for.
Is there a particular, let's say, most innovative use right now, currently, that you've seen recently, that anyone wants to share, that would sort of blow our minds?
I mean, innovative is a difficult word to define. I think there's a lot of things that would apply under that. When I'm looking on the tech side, obviously, you've got the stack that the Void is doing, right, which is a out-of-home entertainment center that uses 4D effects and a technique called redirected walking, which essentially it uses like an equilibrium trick from your brain. Like if you close your eyes and walk in a straight line for 20 feet and then open them, you'll notice that you've veered over a little bit. So it kind of takes that brain trick and it allows you to sort of infinitely walk in a circle. So they basically can have you walk in a circle, but you think you're walking a straight line for like 2 miles. So they're able to compress it down into this sort of
Warehouse.
40 by 40 area, and then add heat and haptic effects and other things on top of that to create this really sensorily deep experience. It kind of like projects out to where this technology could go, when you add haptics and all these other things on top of it in the future. So like that's, I think, a really great example of something innovative on the tech side. On the software side, there's a company that I was looking at just recently that's doing pharmaceutical drug design, but in VR. So now they can actually manipulate the individual molecules and sort of set them up, and then create that drug from the VR design.
I think in general, this is all about brain-machine interface, right? It's how quickly can you get data into a device and how quickly can you get it out. And so just getting the data for you by having cameras pointed everywhere gets a lot of data into it that you don't have to say, currently I'm in 2020 in this building, because it already knows that. And then it knows you, and then it knows where your eyes are gazing, so you can tell, I like these kinds of advertisements or whatever else. There's more information going in, and then the other, as he's saying, more information to you is, it's really hard to read a bunch of text about how nanoparticles work, but it's very easy to look at a big visualization of that surrounds you. And that's a lot of information getting in. And if you can turn information into something that you can process visually, haptically, auditorially, then you can get a lot in, and anything you do will be better or faster or augmented as a result of that dual bandwidth increase.
So Andy, what about you, just in terms of the classroom? Like, is there anything that's really sort of bleeding edge that you see, glimmers of what's to come based on what your students have been developing?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things, right? The one that everybody's excited about that's sort of obvious low-hanging fruit, right, is we have 5 or 6 campuses scattered across the world, and now we can finally start to collaborate with them meaningfully in real time. So its impact on distance education is sort of the one that everybody's, running up to the provost's office saying, but, right, and that kind of stuff. I think the one that I'm most excited about is when you think about it as a brain interface, the part of me that gets excited about that is that it's also your body is also in that, right? And so one of the earliest demos that I got really excited about was all of the gestural painting stuff. So if you're an artist and you've moved to digital tools, you get frustrated because your screen is like this big, right? And you're like, well, I'll zoom it in and I'll do this, and I'll zoom it out and I'll do that, right? But you can't throw paint across the room the way Jackson Pollock did. You can't, have a canvas that's 5 times the size of you and understand that scale. But you can in VR. And there was some great early demos of people painting, Disney animators painting in 3D, right, doing these amazing things because they could move their hands, because the space was infinite. So I think the idea that it's also spatial is something that's key to this medium that differentiates it a little bit.
Yeah, I think also it boils down to communication, right? You look at the reasons why Facebook bought Oculus to kind of kick this thing off again, and
everything old is new again.
Yeah, exactly.
You calling me old? Sorry.
And it's really because if you look at online communication, it eliminates 92% of every communicative act, right? Nonverbal communication is an incredibly huge part of the subtlety of the way that we communicate. And on a mass scale, that's proven itself to be a little bit divisive as to, you look at Facebook news feeds now become very black and white because there's not as much subtlety to the communication. Well, you sacrifice, obviously, that subtlety for the fact that I can talk to somebody in Tokyo right now very easily. But with VR, not only can I speak with that same person, but it can be sort of like I'm having a face-to-face conversation. And Facebook just released Spaces, and it's one of multiple VR social platforms that exist now. And it's just an incredibly naturalistic way, even at this early stage, to speak and communicate and collaborate with individuals. There's this company called Big Screen VR too that's doing, collaborative, social. Their first play is obviously doing on the gaming side. They're doing, local LAN based, but so imagine the same thing as 4 friends hanging out playing Nintendo 64, right? But where they're going is more sort of on the use case side for business. So pair coding, having 2 people, one person sitting in the San Francisco office, another person sitting, in the London office, and being able to sit down next to each other and work as a pair. Right now, the current displays are a little bit low def for reading intense lines of text and doing that efficiently, but we're about a generation away from that being really sort of a norm that I think will emerge.
So let's talk a little bit about giving ourselves, the U.S., a report card in terms of how we're doing, let's say, in terms of the companies, let's say perhaps the companies that you think are doing some really innovative forward things, and how do we compare outside of the U.S. with the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Anybody want to take that? Yeah, go.
So I mean, I think the U.S. is very clearly leading on the innovation side, both on content and technology, but where we're behind is on the adoption side. And if you look at sort of where it's being adopted most heavily is China, where there's a lot of additional government funding that's going into sort of helping explode the ecosystem, right? China right now, I'd say, is probably adopting at almost a 10x pace to the U.S. because of there's a huge push for the out-of-home entertainment. There's a huge push for education. Like there's already elementary school classes that are being taught with VR in China. So you're seeing adoption happen a good bit faster there, but really they're lagging behind on the innovation side compared to us.
Luckily, they're able to catch up very quickly. That's the downside, is they miraculously seem to be able to recreate our technology only a few months after we launched those innovations.
What about on the education side? How do we fare, let's say, with the schools that are basically teaching AR, VR, and MR?
Right. I think that we fare very well, right? I mean, the U.S. university system has done quite well in terms of both providing base science into the innovations that drove a lot of this, and continuing to provide education and innovation opportunities. The lab that I run is a public-private partnership around innovation, and there are lots of those springing up at universities across the nation, which I think make a lot of sense. But I do think we want to consider pretty carefully the fact that a lot of these technologies were born in graphics labs, at major universities. That's where this originally came from.
It was NSF funding, DARPA funding.
NSF funding, DARPA funding,
Mm-hmm.
All of that kind of stuff. And so we have to really keep that pipeline open if we want to continue to lead.
So talking about continuing to lead, so let's just take us there. Let's go 5 years, 7 years, let's go 10 years in the future. Like what do you think are some of the things that we really should be considering now that's going to just fundamentally shift the way we live our lives, that this audience should really be prepared to be thinking about right now?
Well, gosh, in 10 years, we need photogrammetry of Miami because we won't be able to visit the real Miami anymore, right? Let's see. There's so many ways for us to slice this. We've done a little bit of the, can you imagine that you're not going to actually go someplace anymore? Which I think is quite reasonable to assume that you're going to have such a high fidelity experience. Why would you go physically to a place? It doesn't make so much sense. There's a wonderful thing about having sunlight on your face, for sure, but having the meeting where you have to fly to Shanghai and then go to Hong Kong and then to Shenzhen, you're just not going to do that anymore. I just can't imagine that's going to keep going, because VR teleconferencing is it's getting really good. It's effective, and like you said, a generation. And when we say generation, we mean 12 months, not my children. It's happening fast. I would say to me, it's more the concerns of where it's going, right? I don't want to throw out all the what could go wrongs, but if you have glasses that have 18 cameras on them, which those exist, and you're walking around the streets with 18 cameras, boy, you remember all the Google Glass stuff? That was a stinky little cruddy camera, and you saw it coming from a mile away, right? Everyone's wearing Apple eyeglasses 4 years from now. Let's just imagine. And those Apple eyeglasses have 12 cameras on them. There's a billion of them in the world. What have we done? Right? And who's getting that data? Is it Apple? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? That's a really interesting problem, and there's so little regulation in this space. Similarly, we talk about, I'm big on the metaverse, the idea that we're all going to be playing World of Warcraft in 10 years, or Minecraft, or whatever you want to call it, where our jobs will be regulation in World of Warcraft, not regulation in the United States, because most of the economy is within virtual worlds. It sounds a little wacky and crazy, but 10 years ago, the 70th largest country's economy in the world was EverQuest, which is a game that's come and gone. It's nothing compared to League of Legends right now. It's nothing compared to Minecraft right now. It's nothing compared to World of Warcraft, right? These are top 40 world economies that are completely unregulated except when money goes in and out of it, but within the economy, it's all run by a for-profit corporation. So, which I think is great. great. I love these worlds, but it really changes the perspective of what it is that we do in this city. When you think about how people are interacting is going to change so much from an economic perspective, a value creation perspective, a legal perspective, et cetera. It's a lot of fun to start imagining, but it's also a little scary to think about what the web could have been like if AOL had won. Instead of World Wide Web, everybody loved AOL, and it's so good, and man, I love the dial-up speeds and those disks they kept mailing me. I love those folks, right? Well, it didn't happen because World Wide Web was born from government research, academic research, military research, and the whole goal was sharing information. And then an AOL popped up and a few competitors, but they couldn't compete with everyone sharing, right? But now the VR revolution is mostly being paid for by Facebook, Google, Microsoft, advertising companies, who are building hardware and software and have every opportunity of being that AOL. And maybe there's a little less chance now of the academic institutions, the government institutions, military institutions beating them for social VR. That's a really scary thought, that AOL wins the next web and everybody's wearing 18 cameras all the time in that next web. I really hate to keep harshing on AOL, but it's a fine example because I don't want to say Facebook is evil, because I don't think they are. But I would hate for 90% of the social traffic in the world that currently goes through Facebook to also have, where are my eyes looking all the time? Where am I standing all the time? Here's 18 cameras of my house, family, where I went today, this meeting, everything. And that's all being run through someone's server that is essentially unregulated. That's kind of frightening. There's a dystopia in there somewhere, and a really good sci-fi movie as well. But it's not that far away to think 4 years from now we're all wearing Apple eyeglasses, and how does that change the way people interact?
Yeah, I think another thing too is when you start imagining this world where people are living and working in a metaverse, right? And I stress working because I think that there will be, jobs in the virtual space. And there's historic context for that already. The Second Life in the mid-2000s emerged, and there is an actual economy that was created there. People literally buying and selling real estate in a virtual environment, creating, a salary off of that. And so, it's going to beg the question, how do we create and regulate jobs in the virtual metaverse in the future too? And so I think that's going to be, a discussion it'll be a long one over the next 10 years.
Does anyone want to venture into privacy, just in terms of a point of view about that, what it should be in the future? All this data capture?
I guess as the youngest person on the panel, I can speak sort of to the perspective of the social media generation as, what is privacy even anymore, right? Like, we are so used to live streaming every moment of our lives that, my argument to do we care anymore is I don't think that our generation will care so much. There's going to be pockets of it that will, and obviously there needs to be some way to, regulate, keeping intimate private moments intimate and private, right? But for the most part, I think that we've kind of eschewed the definition of privacy as a culture, at least within my generation.
For us old farts, you have to think of a world in which 40% of people taking government funds are taking them in checks still instead of digital distribution in the UK, for example, right? Or don't have any internet connection at all, right? That world still exists, and folks like me want to be able to have the option to opt out of data collection, and I think it's a really hard problem, right? I'm working with sort of a international group on a new digital human rights sort of bill of rights of what are the things that we need to make sure we can protect, or at least you have the ability to opt out and then give it up because you want free content, which is what it seems like everyone's willing to do, is give up their privacy in exchange for free videos or whatever else. But I want to have the old fart option to say, no, thank you, I'll pay for my video, thank you very much. You cannot watch my 16 camera feeds. And it's a really hard problem, because even if we all agree, all the governments agree, all the companies agree, how do we actually make sure that happens? I don't know. Yeah, it's tricky and interesting.
I will point to one piece of contextual evidence too, is you brought up Google Glass and a lot of the backfire for that, right? But you had this product released just recently, and it was absolutely none of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that one thing that they did with the Snap glasses is they added the indicator that's allowing you to know that somebody's actually recording you, and I think that that's it'll be subtleties like that, and whether that's an actual light on the device or a recording button that appears above their head when we all have these devices, remains to be seen, right? But I think that there will be some kind of indication that yes, you're on record right now.
I think the other issue though is one of infrastructure and access, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in no way, shape, we I remember when we started, talking about cell phones and everybody's talking about the digital divide and who could this and who could that and all this kind of stuff. And it turns out that that didn't solve itself in a fair and equitable manner across the board for everybody. And as something like a virtual economy unfolds, right, you're really talking about access is power, right? Access is opportunity. And so how does that actually engage a citizenry, right, in a way that there is opportunity, right? I think there are some really broad and deep questions in there because it's easy at a certain point when you're in downtown San Francisco and everything is wired to the nines and you're part of the technology startup crowd to assume that everybody has that same environment. But in fact, almost nobody has that same environment.
Last I checked, no state has all its schools wired for broadband. Like North Carolina, we're trying to be first, and we're still not there. It's awful, right?
Yeah.
So that digital divide is going to grow massively when a significant part of the country's economy is making fake hats for video games, which sounds crazy, but it's currently, what would you argue? How large is the business of making fake hats for video games right now?
Multi-million-dollar industry.
Yeah, multi-million for the cottage folks who are at home just making some cool stuff for Minecraft, and it's multi-billion if you're League of Legends, because that's really how they're making money, is creating fake
Sponsorships
hats.
on their fake
It's sponsorships for fake hats, exactly, right? So multi-billion-dollar business you can't touch unless you have a virtual reality rig. Yep.
Okay, so I think we're up for maybe our final question, and I think I'm going to make this one be a zinger.
No, let's go positive. I don't want to end on dystopia.
No, we're not going to end on dystopia. So you can go either way. You can either go dystopian or you can go like pure optimist. It's like, so what are you? You have a choice, and everyone has to answer it. And this one is not on our list where we prepared beforehand.
We have not been prepared.
So it's either what's the thing that keeps you up at night with respect to the future of VR, MR, AR, either in terms of the thing that you think could be the best thing that could be a result of this technology, or you could go dystopian in terms of the thing that keeps you up that you're concerned about, if not for regulation or having a point of view and policies and things like that.
I'll start with that.
One way or the other.
So I'll go the utopic route on that question. I'm excited about the extension of consciousness and intelligence that'll happen with this. I think that we're obviously steps away from augmenting our brain. I mean, Elon is trying to do Neuralink, right? But I think that's still 10 to 25 years away at least, right? But it's, like I said before, the contextualization of information and making that relevant to you in the moment rather than having to call upon it makes the device even more of an extension of your own brain. And so, there's questions, and sort of the access level too is to, does that create sort of a delineation between classes when people still at the early adoption stage have access to that technology and have kind of significantly more access to information than people that don't? I mean, that may be a problem in the future, but I do think that in general, it's going to be brilliantly great for the extension of our consciousness. I think actually, my favorite conceptual image in all of VR, AR, MR is one off of your website. It's a little girl sitting at her table, and there's a fairy pointing to a multiplication table. And basically, so that idea of having the companion character that can help tutor and grow with you as you grow up, I think that's an incredibly magical thing, and that's, I think, going to be something that your imaginary friend growing up is going to be a little bit more real to you going forward.
Andy?
I don't think this one is either dystopian nor hugely positive. I think it's a question of recognizing the landscape and thinking about a strategy, right? So in my world, in the university world, we break ourselves off into these discrete little disciplines, and each one has their department and their structure and all of this. And from a funding perspective, kind of each one has their agency and all of this kind of stuff, right? And these technologies just cut sideways across all of that, right? We think about, the division between the arts and the sciences, right? This is both art and science, right? And it will work its best, and we will accomplish the most, and we will realize that vision that you laid out when we really embrace it as both an art and a science. And we used to talk about STEM versus the rest of stuff, and then it got a little better when we said STEAM, sort of jack that back in there. But really, those are little progressions towards where this is taking us, right? And so we have an opportunity to really lead in thinking through a strategy to address collaborative work across those spaces. But it's hard because it's not the way that we've structured ourselves for the last gazillion years. So it really requires kind of stepping back and really thinking through things from a different angle.
All right, bring it home, Mike.
I love dystopias, but VR's magic. And if those of you who haven't done it, come tonight to the event. Go try it somewhere at a Best Buy if you have to. But standing on the edge of a mountaintop and trying to step off the cliff in VR and you can't do it even though you know you're in a room will tell you how wildly impactful it is. And you also feel like you're on a mountainside and you can hear the mountainside. And it's so tangible, so embracing. It's stunning what you could do with that. Anyone who does it can say, I can think of a million things I could do with this right away that are so much better. Not just watch a movie, not just porn. Oh, yes, those will all be very popular big businesses, but there's so many amazing things you can do with that level of immersion. The future is wide open. I have a 2-year-old and 4-year-old, which is why I'm sitting here, because they're going to work and play in a VR fabric that is really unrelated to where they physically are. Like, it seems completely obvious. And I just want to make sure that's a safe, open place for them. And I think we're ahead of it. We're far enough ahead of it that we can be really deliberate about that. And the companies in this space are really embracing it. Magic Leap is one who's like, yes, we want to be responsible and do the right thing. And we don't even know what it is. We've got to figure it out now before we set it all free. So I'm just psyched everybody's here and being part of that conversation. So there you go. A little bit of both.
Yeah, thank you all. It's a glimpse into the future, and I remember back in 1994 and 1995, people were talking about the internet and using these what are now kind of laughable terms and think about what the internet could bring, and early days of the World Wide Web, and you think about what virtual reality is going to look like in 10 or 15 years. These conversations will seem, visionary in some respects, but also very elementary, because this is 1.0 or 2.0. Wait till we get to 3 and 4 and 5.0. And I remember at GDC last year, my first experience in VR was walking between the Twin Towers on a tightrope. And it was in conjunction with promotion of a movie, the Man on a Wire, and they had the width of the tightrope, and you actually had a physical thing that you were on, but you had a headset on, and I heard seagulls below me. I heard taxis honking below me, and I don't have a height thing, but or at least I didn't, but. And they're evil, so they actually had fans blowing on you. But I can assure you, when I turned around and I was about 5 feet from the tower, I ran to the end, even though my brain knew that I was inside a conference room in the Moscone Center in downtown San Francisco. So this is going to be utterly remarkable. It's going to be much larger than we, even the visionaries on this panel could even conceive. We just don't. We just don't know. However, you will be able to sample some of it tonight. This has been a lot of the substance around this, but tonight there is an event where you can witness some of the sizzle around that. And we've got the Microsoft HoloLens, the HTC Vive, Oculus Rift, Samsung Gear, PlayStation VR, Mattel Viewmaster, Google, as well as Discovery is providing content from 5 o'clock till 8 o'clock at ESA. It's at 601 Mass Ave Northwest. It's our new headquarters. We're really thrilled. It's the first time we've had everything together under one roof. So we encourage you to come. Please tell your colleagues. Please tell your bosses. I want to thank our panel. This has really been an incredible. This is like looking at a Viewmaster back in the day. But instead of seeing the Grand Canyon, you're seeing what the world is going to look like in 25 years. And I want to thank our co-chairs of the new caucus, Daryl Issa, Bill Flores, Ted Lieu, Suzanne Delbene, and Yvette Clark. I want to especially thank Ali Amr Hushman for his great work in envisioning what this could be, and all of the hard work you did to make it happen. I want to point out Kevin O'Hanlon from the ESA team. Thank you, Kevin, as well as Carrie and Nika and Missy. They worked so hard to make this. The comms team at ESA and the whole team, and particularly Jordan Ballard. Jordan, you've been great to work with on this. Really helped sort of taking this from gestation all the way through today. So thank you for this. Thank you for your time and attention, and we hope to see you tonight. Cheers.